there's no such thing as separation between church and state. That's a radical concept for Americans, isn't it? But that's what St. Augustine says. And the reason it's a lie is because it contends with the very psyche of men to align themselves with something larger than themselves. Then there's Aurelius, a young North African scholar. Not exactly the type that you would consider to be a saint. He is immoral, he's self-centered, and he's going to the College of Milan to study Ambrose, the greatest orator of the time. Not to get his content, but to understand his technique for his own purposes. Leaving with the lesson of a gospel by Paul, he hears little girls outside. Pick up and read. Pick up and read. He does, because he's a good student. And he's convicted. We know this man. He became St. Augustine. And he is the all-important first step to the American Revolution. I'll show you why. St. Augustine wrote 248 books, rather a lot. His most famous work is The City of God, and great men throughout history, including our founding fathers, have referred to this book as the second most important manuscript behind the Bible. You see, Augustine was in a unique place in history because he looked at the demise of the Roman Empire, deduced its cause, and wrote the principles for a new civilization. It's a cosmic view of history. It describes why pagans and humanism brings death to any culture, why the city of God will enter the city of man and contend with it, and should never compromise with it. And the city of God is more powerful, with predestination of faith determining all. Martin Luther said, "This one book set the course of Western civilization." John Knox said, "The city of God is the essence, the incisive Christian thought applied to the circumstances of this poor, fallen world." The most important lesson, I think, from City of God is this. See if you can follow. How you view God determines how you view your fellow man. Is that true? Then how you view your fellow man determines how you view the government, doesn't it? Do you need protection from your neighbor? Then you need a government that's there, don't you? If you don't fear your neighbor, then you don't need government intrusion, right? Because the problem is this. It is that government that will determine whether you live in bondage or freedom. You see, there's no such thing as separation between church and state. That's a radical concept for Americans, isn't it? But that's what St. Augustine says. And the reason it's a lie is because it contends with the very psyche of men to align themselves with something larger than themselves. Whether that's a religion of Christ, Islam, or even humanism. Because remember, we said humanism is a religion. Even our Supreme Court says so. Another principle of St. Augustine is people have a natural propensity to seek bondage. Either it's submission to God and His sovereignty, or upon a compromise, a power monger who will take control, replace God as provider, and use that authority to his will. You see, St. Augustine was ahead of Joseph Schumpeter 1,500 years. Joseph Schumpeter in the 1960s wrote a book, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, where he claims that democracies all tend towards socialism. And at the time, it created quite a stir from socialists and communists everywhere. Because It gave scientific veracity to Karl Marx's philosophy. But you see, St. Augustine had this all covered by the principle I've just discussed. The third principle in City of God counters the notion that religion needs to stay out of politics. You remember the Christian Coalition. I mean, after all, the fall of Rome occurred with the majority of non-believers, right? So its downfall is surely the fault of the majority, right? The answer is not according to Augustine. Silence of Christians is just as responsible for evil and the nation's subsequent demise as the humanist perpetrators. There's some tough love there. And why? Because according to Augustine, even the minority truth will prevail as long as it's heard. In fact, I think Samuel Adams said that.
It does not require a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority keen to set the brush fires in people's minds.
Now note, we're not talking about a theocracy, right? And our founding fathers, as we'll get into next time, did not want a theocracy at all. Why? It's a principle we've already talked about, but we'll delve in further. It's because there were so many theocracies run by statists in the name of God. If you can take a religion and you can twist it, that's the issue. But this points to another principle: why despots rage against biblical Christianity. One of the reasons: it will not compromise. It reaches where statists often can't, the heart. I mean, why else would someone persecute, paraphrasing Paul now, weak, passive, humble, kindly bunch of pathetic, low-life spiritual intellectuals? It's because their very existence challenges world authority. And history is replete with their conquests. Because when people understood the sovereignty of God, transformation inevitably came. The City of God is still considered one of the most important manuscripts of Western civilization. But every blueprint also needs implementers with the tools and esprit de corps to carry out that plan. And to understand the strength of such influence, we need to understand the lives and character of those who began to turn the world of tyranny upside down. Next time.